Today we're thrifting vintage kitchen items and giving them new life as unique home decor. Welcome to the Chic Show. Today's playlist is hosted by Loli D's Creations, Lady Red Crafting, and Jackie Burns Creations. Thrift stores are packed with used kitchen decor, and with a little imagination, they'll make beautiful upcycled decor. This vintage saucer has such a sweet detail, and it's perfect for a vignette. So I'm using some of IOD's apothecary stamps and a black ink pad. I will tell you the slick surface did cause a little bit of smearing, so I'm going to have to work on this in order to perfect this particular method. But I'm going to go ahead and stamp on the top of the plate. I started in the center, now I'm going to stamp on the top, and I'm stamping Kiss the Cook. So Cook will go at the bottom. I did try adding some matte Mod Podge on the bottom to see if that would help the ink not to smear, and it did not help. But as I said, I'll have to continue to work on this particular method to see what does work. Small touches like this can bring vintage kitchen items into your space in such a cozy, affordable way. This cutting board has a perfect shape for a mini sign. I'm going to give it a coat of Carriage House in Fusion paint, and I'm just painting the top of the cutting board. Fusion paint does have a built-in sealer, so there's no need to seal this after you paint, and it makes it the perfect surface for a rub-on transfer. I chose a transfer from IOD's Home Sweet Home transfer packet. While I knew this transfer wouldn't completely fit onto this cutting board, I love the way it looks with the way that I did it. So to cut off those edges so that they don't go around the sides, I just kind of rubbed extra along the edges there, and that pretty much cut the transfer so that it would not extend over to the side. I did use my backing paper to burnish the transfer down onto the cutting board to be sure everything was adhered nicely, and then I gently sand over the top with my finger sander. And to clean up any edges, I sanded around the edges with that finger sander as well. Once I have this all rubbed down, it will need to be sealed in. The paint is sealed in already, but the transfer also needs to be sealed, so I'll be using DIY's liquid patina. I added a little bit of black twine to the top. I would rather use a thin black leather, but I didn't have any, so I'm just using this black jute twine that I got on clearance at Walmart at Christmas time. Whether you hang it or lean it against your backsplash, it adds a touch of kitchen decor that feels both rustic and intentional. This old grater is getting new life as a photo holder. Added an old clothespin to the top and a magnet to the bottom. This would also be the perfect display piece for an old family recipe. To jazz it up just a little bit more, I also added a fall stem, a perfect little rustic kitchen decor item. Another grater and another rustic kitchen decor idea. I made a small rolling pin using a wood dowel and some little wood pieces that I had in my stash, and I'm painting the handles of this little rolling pin with Lichen by Fusion. I picked out some fall florals and then used an old ripped up sheet to secure it and the rolling pin to the grater. I used another piece of this homemade ribbon and wrapped it around my fingers a few times and then tied it to the center to create a messy bow. I then reached into the ribbon and pulled out all of those little loops so that I could fluff it up. Who knew that an old grater and an old bed sheet could make such cute kitchen decor? This old wood paddle is going to become another vintage sign. I made a stain for it using brown craft paint and a little bit of water. I do want to add another rub-on transfer to this piece, and I didn't want to risk it not sticking, so I chose to stain it with paint mixed with water rather than an antique wax or something like that. So I just mixed this together and then painted it on. I made sure to cover the front, the sides, and the back. Once I had painted it on, I went back with a dry paper towel and just wiped off any excess and set that aside to dry. I chose this transfer from IOD's Classic Pots transfer set because it fit perfectly and took up the most space on this paddle. I used the transfer tool to rub the transfer down, and then I gently pull back the paper as I go. Once everything is rubbed down, to make sure that it is adhered completely, I rub over it with that backing paper, and then I will also use my little finger sander to sand over the top gently. Here you see me adding some liquid patina to seal over the transfer and this stamp that I forgot to show you. That stamp is a ticking stripe from the Mercantile IOD stamp set, and I just used black ink and stamped that across the top of that area to fill it in. Now I'm just adding a messy bow to the top, and then this project will be complete. A simple DIY that transforms an old paddle into stylish home decor. This particular item I got on clearance at Dollar General, and it just needed a little bit of love. I wanted it to be a little bit more farmhouse looking, so I removed the top and set it aside, and I'm going to give it 2 coats of buttercream by Dixie Belle. I applied the second coat using a round sponge brush in a stippling motion. This gets rid of any brush strokes that there are and helps to cover up any of those darker spots. I chose to use IOD's Floriography paint inlays for this project. And for a paint inlay, you need a coat of paint that is dry, and then you apply a wet coat to apply your paint inlay to. This will allow the paint on the inlay to embed into the wet paint. And the process for this is add your wet paint, spritz your paint inlay on the back side, lay it into that wet paint as I'm doing here, and then spritz it again or use a dabbing motion with a wet paper towel and dab off any excess water. So I'm going to continue to do this all the way around the canister, and then I will set it aside to dry completely. Then once it is completely dry, you're going to come back, spritz it with water, dab away any excess, let it sit for about 30 seconds, and then you can start pulling away the backing papers. I continued all the way around the canister, pulling away those backing papers, and then I set it aside to dry. Once it was dry, I took it outside and sprayed it with a clear spray paint to seal in that paint, because paint inlays, you don't want to brush over them or you will smear the paint. Now for the top, I have this little wooden knob that I'm going to paint with black paint. It's by Fusion, I believe it's coal black. Use some Tite Bond Quick and Thick to glue my knob onto the center of the top. The bamboo was really a pretty color, and I like the contrast between the black and the bamboo, so I chose to not paint the bamboo top. I used a little Q-tip to remove any excess glue that seeped out around the edges and set it aside to dry. I love that this is still functional kitchen decor that keeps that vintage look alive. This old rusty metal strainer gets new life as a wall basket. First thing I did was add this little jute twine tassel that I had in my stash. Next I'm going to be using this sunflower and this Spanish moss, both from Dollar Tree. So I glued my Spanish moss to a piece of paper. You know how messy that can be. And I just set it down into the strainer, and then I clipped my flower to the Spanish moss, and then this project is complete. You could hot glue it down in there, but I would like to be able to change this for the season, so I just laid it down in there. These kinds of vintage items are perfect for adding charm to your space. I hope you've loved these thrift store finds, creative makeovers, and charming kitchen decor ideas. Check out the playlist or this video right here for more inspiration. Thanks so much for watching. Remember to share the chic. Bye now.